Let me introduce to you is Steve Stroh, the editor of Retries. He has been writing for, well, we're going on our 5th year. So he writes about everything amateur radio. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to the love of my life, Steve.
Welcome. And it is so cool to see all of you show up for my idea of a amateur radio digital conference. And the theme that will run through this is what you're going to be seeing is amateur radio of the 21st century. This is not to denigrate in any way the amateur radio of the 20th century, but there was a lot of stuff that we do as hams that the current generation it just doesn't click with them. And I think that the key for perpetuating amateur radio in the 21st century is to not reimagine it, but republicize it, I guess. Reconceptualize it is the better word, to address their interests and the changing demographics and just the general technology. In general, these are the points about what it needs to be, what it needs to become. Especially my particular interest is in data, and I see that borne out over the current generation. I'll be touching on a few reasons about that. And you'll be hearing the phrase new tech hams a lot. That is a new generation of folks that are coming in. And boy, that was absolutely epitomized by the past week of being here for the GNU Radio Conference. Every one of those are fit the definition that I've developed for new tech hams. I get to throw a few thanks towards my wonderful wife, Tina Stroh, KD7WSF, without whom this would just not even be remotely possible. This would have stayed in the realm of nutty fantasy rattling around in my brain and until Tina said, yeah, we can do that. We'd like to thank our friend and colleague in ZRDC, Don Rotolo, N2IRZ, who has ably compiled the proceedings and herder of cats, getting presentations in, getting it all put together. And thank you, GR GNU Radio Conference, for coming to Everett. You were kind of the impetus of this. And thank you for doing that. And special thanks to Sam, who's been just so gracious this week and brought us into the fold and gave us plenty to do and just plugged us in. It's been great. And it was just a continuous learning experience. Thank you, so many of the paid subscribers and a few of you who are founding members who are here. Thank you. You can't believe what it means to, have paid subscribers helping out with the heavy lifting of this conference. And my thanks to ARDC for a sponsorship of this conference. That helped a lot. And again, thanks to ARRL for early acknowledgement of ZRDC as just another event in the big picture. Wasn't quite sure how the ARRL was going to receive a privately organized and not directly ARR affiliated. We weren't a club or anything, and they were no sweat, no problem. Ham Radio Workbench interviewed Tina and I last month, or July, August, I don't remember. I believe it was July. It gave us a big boost of mind share about the fact that ZRDC was the thing. And thank all of you for showing up and our virtual attendees. And we've gotten so many gracious notes, just all kinds of encouragement, keeps us going. A couple of dedications. My friend and mentor, Dwayne Hendricks, WAA DZP, who's a silent keyboard. Dwayne just was an early supporter of Zero Retries, and he got me plugged into so many things, amateur radio and not. And Greg Jones, WD5IVD, another silent keyboard, who was the president of Tapper for a long time. And Greg reshaped the Digital Communications Conference to be just a really inspirational event. Just was a ball of fire, and we lost him way, way, way too early. I was informed and taught and brought up by the Northwest Amateur Packet Radio Association and the Pacific Northwest, and the follow-on to that, the Pacific Northwest TCP/IP group. We also call ourselves, in prouder moments, the Wet Net Mafia. Lastly, the Tapper DCCs, which ran for decades, and they were pretty much the primary inspiration for this conference. Why are we doing another, and especially an in-person conference? It's so much more efficient to do a virtual conference. Well, as I witnessed again this week, the person-to-person connections are just incredibly powerful. You meet people you wouldn't have imagined. You talk about things you wouldn't have imagined. You are energized by the personal human connection. We are communicators, but eyeball to eyeball is the most powerful form of communication. And you're here because I was privileged to attend Tapper DCCs. There was a conference here in the Seattle area, the MicroHams Digital Conference, which was a one-day version of the DCC, with a local flavor. And that was very, very powerful in its time. And there was another conference called Communications Academy, which focused on MCOM, but the presentations were uniformly excellent. And we were blessed for those 10 years or so that all of those were happening simultaneously. Why does radio technology, and by extension amateur radio, matter in this era? I meant to offer a disclaimer. My daughter and my wife always tell me that my slides are too text heavy and I should jazz them up with pictures and not so much text. And I decided to say on brand because of Zero Retries, it's mostly text. This is the way I think the best. So Starlink is a really good example of why radio technology matters. I mean, that Starlink, in my opinion, finished the problem of getting broadband to everybody who needs it, no matter where they are. We had various promises trying to deploy fiber and terrestrial wireless and cellular, and it never finished the job, but Starlink finished the job. We're all connected now via Wi-Fi, mobile broadband, GNSS, global navigation satellite systems like GPS in the US, but the GPS is not the only one anymore. I mean, we couldn't, our society wouldn't survive without positioning systems. Bluetooth. Bluetooth is monitoring my glucose levels at this moment. So, and at times Bluetooth is life critical. And as example, what's happening in Ukraine, wireless technology, radio technology really matters to those folks because it's life safety critical to be able to defend and continue the fight. And we get to experiment with all of that because we are an experimental service. We don't have a commercial imperative. We are designed to be flexible, agile, and experimental. Just as an example, continuing the theme of meeting in person, some of the connections I made at GRCon just concluded is I advocated for amateur radio. If you love what you're doing with GNU radio, boy, you can do that in spades with amateur radio. Continue your experimentation at power, at scale, on other bands that can do amazing things besides the unlicensed bands. I talked up the LinHT, Linux Handy Talkie, which I'll be talking about a little bit in a moment. And when I did that lightning talk about the LinHT and started showing some pictures and just described it in general terms, eyes started lighting up. So, you know, the connection for amateur radio from GNU radio was made in that moment. What's different about this conference? One gripe I've had about traditional conferences is that they throw it open to proposals and then they present whatever comes in the door. I thought that a focused conference like this, that I wanted to show off some of the technological innovation that is happening in amateur radio. So I went out and solicited presentations. Wasn't always successful, but we have an amazing slate of people that are going to talk about various facets of technological innovation in amateur radio. And for other conferences that, you know, we'll talk about one project or two projects. Oh, that's interesting. But what I'm trying to present here with Zero Retries Digital Conference is the totality of the innovation. We are innovating and we are doing it at scale. It's just very dispersed. It's very disparate, but it's happening a lot, which I hope you're going to walk away from learning all about that. A little bit about Zero Retries, what kind of the seed corn of this conference. It's my newsletter where I talk about things that have been interesting to me, but aren't talked about much anymore in the mainstream amateur radio media. Reviews about HF radios, walkie-talkies, the 20-page nostalgia section in QST, et cetera. So I report in Zero Retries what I find interesting, and apparently it's resonating with others because I now have 3,200 plus subscribers, and I've been doing it I'm in my 5th year of writing Zero Retries now, weekly, mostly, almost every week. Well, again, I was writing about the stuff that interested me, and then there came this mission creep that I started seeing things that needed to be said and done and talked about that weren't just reporting what others were doing. And that is mission creep. So one of the first things I realized was that we really need to reconceptualize what amateur radio is to this new population that I've started calling new tech hams. And there are also old tech hams, but tech hams who are into the hobby of amateur radio for their own purposes. They're transactional about amateur radio. They don't get into it as a pastime. They don't get into it as a hobby to consume their idle hours. They are in it for their own reasons. And what I'm going to talk about is we're bringing to bear, this is all coming to a convergence because we have more technology than we've ever had before that can be directly applied to amateur radio, but a lot of us just don't realize how much technology there is out there waiting to be used. And we're also poised to start doing data communications that is more relevant in the 21st century than it was than the communications modes of the 20th century. The FCC is at least asking questions, like in the proceedings that changed the data rate of possibilities for HF radio and basically struck down all of the mode restrictions and bandwidth limits in favor of a 2.8 kilohertz bandwidth, do whatever you want. They didn't do the same thing for VHF and UHF, but they did ask the question, should we do the same thing for VHF and UHF bands? And the resounding answer was yes, including from the ARRL, which I'm very gratified to have seen. The ARRL says in the VHF and UHF bands, we should just simply eliminate the bandwidth limits and the symbol rates in other modes. So I have been commenting as part of Zero Retries on that. Others have followed. Others who were readers of Zero Retries followed in that, follow the ARRL and what I said. And weighed in. We tried to make a difference. Another mission creep is dreaming bigger dreams, like the possibility of a geosynchronous amateur radio payload or even a small satellite in geosynchronous orbit above the Western Hemisphere, just like we have one for the Eastern Hemisphere in QO100. And the ultimate mission creep to date is you're here, Zero Retries Digital Conference. That was not in my wildest imagination when I started Zero Retries. These quotes really guide me, and they're like the yin and the yang of Zero Retries interesting amateur radio activities. Ultimately, we really need to prove our utility to society because we are occupying spectrum that is worth a lot of money to the right people. And so we have to keep proving ourselves that we are worthy of having access to this spectrum. But on the same time, my friend Bob Whitty says very, very well, the universal purpose of ham radio is to have fun messing around with radios. Truer words were never spoken. New tech hams. This is one of the first things that emerged out of writing Zero Retries and watching trends. I took the ARRL CEO, David Minster, to task for an editorial he wrote, boo-hooing that technician class hams were coming in, but they weren't advancing to general. They weren't conventionally active, like getting on HF and progressing to their general, class license. They weren't engaging on the air. They weren't joining the ARRL and they weren't joining clubs. So he considered those kind of a lost opportunity. I'm not going to use the phrase I hate, but which is they weren't real hams. So I took issue to this pretty strongly in Zero Retries. It cost me a fair number of readers because of the ARRL advocates, but so be it. New tech hams are generally younger. They are involved in tech. The GNU radio folks who have gotten ham licenses as an adjunct of their activity in GNU radio are a perfect example. There are many others. I've found folks that wanted to get their amateur radio license so they could deploy outdoor microwave networks. That was interesting to them. So ham radio let them do that. So, okay, fine, I'll get a ham radio license. Hackers are coming in because they want to play with, real radios, with power, and they want to do repeaters and check all that stuff out. Makers, electrical engineering students. And then the new tech hams treat internet as just another utility, the same way my generation treated electricity. It's just a given. It's out there. Why wouldn't we be using it in relation to every other activity that we do? So these are some of the talks you're going to hear today. These are all near and dear to my heart. I am going to be sitting there eagerly absorbing the information that's presented, just like you are. I won't steal any of their thunder by describing it, but every one of these was very carefully chosen. And I am particularly grateful to Paul for stepping up when we had a cancellation that the M17 presenter could not be here. So we had an open slot, and Paul was very gracious to step up with a presentation called Optimizing Wideband Receiver Performance. These are some of the things that we won't talk about, not because they are less important than or less interesting than what we are going to hear about today. We just didn't have time. One-day conference, we can't cram it all together in 15-minute segments. So I will talk about these. VAR FM is just an amazing system for doing data communications on VHF and UHF, and it works fantastically well in what data folks would consider an impossibly narrow channel of 12.5 kilohertz. 25 kilobits per second Very strong forward error correction. It shifts and downshifts depending on band conditions. Mercury HF modem is the same thing for HF, and it's open source. There's a system called New Packet Radio that can do up to 1 megabit per second on our UHF band. It requires to do 1 megabit per second. It requires a 1 megahertz channel, problematic in the US. So we need to fix that. We have 2 new forward error correction systems, which was kind of the missing piece for packet radio. If you do forward error correction, all of a sudden packet really starts working, especially at those higher speeds where 1 bit error can, cause a retransmission. I have developed a concept called superpeter, and it's just purely a concept. I'm not going to be doing any of the technology development, but I know what's possible and what can be done. I wrote a pretty long paper in the proceedings about this, and I'll be talking more about it. I have talked about it in Zero Retries, and I will talk more about it in future issues. Free DV Rade. If the lightning talks aren't subscribed, I'm going to pull up the very brief YouTube video and play that here for those folks who haven't been previously knowledgeable about what Free DV. Free DV is a open source digital voice mode specifically engineered for the vagaries of HF. Very narrow channel, very robust forward error correction. It's just amazing. KA9Q radio is a piece of software that's just amazing. It takes the raw IQ output of a software-defined receiver, and in one form of it, it can virtualize all of the repeater channels in a band, for example, 2 meters. It can receive simultaneously all of the channels, all of the channelized portions of the 2 meter band simultaneously. And it's all available on the host computer. You just have to decode, you just have to go and listen to it. But it's recorded, it's unlike scanning sequentially or tuning into a specific frequency, it's doing all of the channels all of the time simultaneously. And favorite drumbeat of mine, we would really love to have a geo satellite, because we techies sometimes have a hard time finding each other in physical proximity. Think of a geo satellite as a continent-wide repeater system that we can all be chatting on, and doing it via doing it via RF instead of via internet. We can now find each other on the internet. It's kind of not, to me, it's not quite as satisfying as doing it with RF, and I would really love to be doing it on geo. And we have one geo user from the UK here. Derek, if you want to know how much fun it is to be on a geo satellite it's designed specifically for amateur radio, Derek can tell you. I'm going to mention Mestastic, although it's not technically a amateur radio activity. Some people are using it on amateur radio bands, the 440 band. And it's a perfect example of what I'm talking about, new tech hams. They're coming in and experimenting with radio technology, but with no need for amateur radio. They're using the unlicensed bands. They're using very low-cost hardware. It's using a proprietary but very robust technology called LoRa. Although LoRa, it's a little fuzzy to me how proprietary it actually is, because there is now a LoRa waveform available in GNU radio. So by my definition, anything in GNU radio is open source. So maybe LoRa could be considered open source. At least it's hackable. They're using Mestastic on 433 megahertz in Europe. That's an unlicensed portion of spectrum there. And in the US, 902 to 928 megahertz. They're having fun, but without the burdens of amateur radio. And as cross-fertilization, amateur radio, at least those of us who were involved in the packet radio era, we learned a lot about what not to do in deploying wide area networks. Like, don't put all of your communications on a single channel. It sounds great in theory, it just doesn't scale. So if you have multiple channels, nodes with multiple radios that can route, create backbones, that sort of thing, works a lot better. So the hams can help the Meshtastic users. And one thing that got pounded home to me during GNU Radio this week is if you're going to talk to them, you got to show up with them. So I got to get myself on Meshtastic so I can walk the talk instead of talk the talk up with them. Another special mention, this is Linux HT, and I'm sorry I don't have a picture of it. If you want to check out this Linux HT, go to m17project.org and go back a few blog posts and you will see the photos of it. So this has been described by a number of people. I'm not quite there, but I'm very close to there, of being the most exciting and important project in amateur radio at the moment. It is an open source portable radio that will run GNU Radio on the radio. You just download your GNU Radio waveform to the radio and start and have at it. It will have ultimately 5-watt output. That little amplifier is in development, but so the prototypes will be running some, maybe as much as 100 milliwatts. And the thing that makes LinHT most exciting to me is that they figured out how to get it going at scale. They took a commodity Chinese portable radio, they chose one, and then they replicated the form factor of the circuit board and all of the electrical interfaces and all of the firmware interfaces. They can drive the display, they can, they hook up to the microphone, everything. And so all that's going to be required by the Chinese manufacturers is to make their own version of the LinHT. It's all open source. It's going to be easy. They will sell a ton of them. And keep in mind what I said before, that in Europe, 433 megahertz is an unlicensed band. So they can start playing with their 5-watt. I don't know what the regulations are in Europe, but they can start taking their LinHT and running their GNU Radio waveforms on it and having lots of fun. Again, a theme that I keep coming back to is that we are in a unique moment. We're at a convergence points where these new tech hams are coming into amateur radio and looking around for interesting things to do, and they can innovate in radio. We're back at the point where we can start doing interesting things now, building new hardware in amateur radio as amateur radio operators, because we were kind of locked out for a while because of surface mount components. Okay, thank you. And other issues, but we're now that radios are mostly software, we are back in the game. We have radio chipsets. We have the ability to organize. We can build what's needed via contract manufacturers, and we can fund what we want to do via crowdfunding. Secret innovation weapon. We can do whatever we want within a few limits, like don't encrypt, stay within the bands, non-commercial. But other than that, we can do what we want as long as we publicly disclose what we're doing and how, if secret government agencies want to listen in, they can learn how. Not that they need our help, but at least we did a good faith effort of explaining what we did, as long as it's publicly documented. And I love the Canadians for this attitude. Do your thing and not bother the regulators. I'm going to have to start speeding through these. ARDC grants are another enabling factor, because we can now, think about the issues of trying to make something that is open source, meaning you're going to give away all the intellectual property for a small market, amateur radio. It's very specialized, VHF and UHF things. So ARDC grants is a critical factor in this new paradigm of being able to advance the technology within amateur radio. And one of the best things about it, one of the bottlenecks we had was that we needed some things we need to pay for professional labor, FPGA programming, microwave design, those sorts of things. That's just not laying around within the amateur radio populace for the most part. And those who can do, they're oversubscribed. They can get side gigs. They have kids to pay college fees for, et cetera. This is a hot button of mine, new media models, not paywalled. I don't mean to pound on the ARRL, but they just really don't get it, that they're part of the reason that they're losing audience is that the Node folks are not going to pay $65 just to read their precious content. So it's got to be open, or it's irrelevant. We have easier ways to produce content. We can distribute via the internet, podcasts, YouTube channels. DLARC, you'll be hearing a presentation about this, but this was another enabling factor that we now have the library where all of the collected knowledge can go, with a few exceptions, and it's up to Kay whether he'll talk about that or not. Zoom, we can now, convene technical focused conferences that are, focused on getting a project done. GitHub, amazing. Again, these are all tools that we've had that we haven't had before. We haven't had all these factors coming together. AI, soon enough, we're gonna be able to just ask an AI questions about amateur radio, open-ended questions, just like we would ask our Elmer in my generation. Amateur radio is showing up in places that you might not be seeing. IEEE Spectrum, Hackaday, RTL SDR. And in conclusion, amateur radio of the 21st century is going to be mostly about digital and data. That's my perspective. It's going to be mostly software, very strong technology focus. It is, a lot of people are getting into amateur radio because it's an adjunct to their technical career. Amateur radio is, if I do my job right in the time I've got left, it will be perceived as relevant once again. And one of the hot buttons is, how do I explain to my peeps how much fun amateur radio is? We've got to do a better job of giving them those talking points, and then the peers will come in. I think that's it. Yep. So, do I have time for questions? I'm told I have time for questions. Okay. Oh, is there a roaming microphone?
Hey, I love the idea of waveform experimentation. What are the requirements for publicly documenting? So for example, if I just place something in GitHub, is that sufficient? What's the FCC requirements for publicly documenting waveform?
Okay, I'm not being glib when I reply with this reply. I am being completely, 100% accurate. The phrase in the FCC regulations is publicly documented. That's it. Publicly, it's published in a magazine article. It's put on a website devoted to the mode. GitHub is perfectly good. As long as my interpretation of that is that if somebody receives a weird and wacky transmission from my station and they say, well, we think you were up to nefarious purposes and we think that's encryption, prove that it isn't. He said, here is where I documented the mode that I'm using. You can take this information and recreate the waveform that you recorded, because of course with GNU Radio, you can just record RF, play it back using the information that was publicly disclosed before I made the transmission. Then you're in the clear. That's my interpretation of publicly documented. They don't define it. They just say publicly documented.
Anecdotally, that's the same answer which UK and German regulators have provided informally, is that if it's up on GitHub or an equivalent, your blog, it is proof that you are not intentionally trying to obfuscate the signal. And it's an enforcement. It's a post-enforcement legislative issue.
Yeah, I'll stand up. Yeah, just publicly documented as an example. Some of my stuff I'm transmitting oddball waveforms or data sequences. And what I've done is at the end of a transmission frame, however I define it, I've got a gap. And in that gap, I send Morse code with my website, that says, for more information, go here. And that's where I describe what the frame format and protocol and all that. So I think anything in good faith, I hope, is good enough.
Another example of that is the Nino TNC, unless you disable it, transmits a frame every so often that has their website embedded into it. So, any other questions? Well, thank you for your graciousness. Thank you for coming again.